Today marks 1 year since President Biden signed a law making Juneteenth a federal holiday. And on Sunday, Americans across the country will observe that day by celebrating the freedom of the last enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that the news of freedom reached all slaves in the U.S. And just this month, Alabama joined 47 other states that already recognize Juneteenth as a holiday. ABC News contributor and SiriusXM Radio host Mike Muse joins me live now for more on all of this. Mike, so good to see you here in studio.
So good to see you.
Always good to see your smiling face.
Happy Friday, man.
Happy Friday to you, too. I could tell it was a Friday smile.
Yeah.
Let's start with the acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Why is it so important?
It's important to acknowledge this is because this is the sheer fact alone that we had over 250,000 enslaved Black Americans that were in Texas. And for 2 years, they were not made aware that the Emancipation Proclamation was actually signed and that they were free. So imagine being a human being, not being treated as a human being and being seen as less than, having to do manual labor for free in the hot, in the heat, in the sun, under extraneous conditions, getting beat, tortured, raped and pillaged, and you actually had the chance to be out of there 2 years ago,
right.
And then you weren't made aware. And so that is the significance of it. This holiday, makes it made a federal holiday, allows us to tell that story. And so as you know, that the history always must be told, or else it will get repeated in other forms. And so it's important that we always tell this story.
All right, and as I mentioned, Alabama just made Juneteenth a holiday statewide. Can we expect other remaining states to do that? And how important would it be, especially in this political climate that we find ourselves in?
Well, I would hope so. But in the political climate that we have today, I don't know. And that is to the point that you're making in this political climate that we're in. But the importance of it will be absolutely significant for it to happen. It's important that every state recognize this. Every state is important in order to show the history, to teach it, to make sure that it's in the schools, to make sure companies acknowledge it, make sure that communities acknowledge it, and to make sure we all take time as a nation, state by state, to acknowledge what happened in the past. Because what we're seeing now, Phil, is that although people are not enslaved anymore, you're still seeing racism and discrimination pop up and out in policies. So long gone are days of where you saw segregated signs, right, for colors only, for whites only. But now you're seeing that in policies. And so if you're unable to understand the history, then you don't understand why these policies are a detriment to communities and to marginalized areas and marginalized communities. And this is why it's important that the states follow suit to make sure that we don't repeat the past in the form of policies.
Right, and you're talking about policies and signs, and on a more micro level, Buffalo. That racism still exists and is still deadly in this country. Activists have called on the president to sign an executive order to study reparations by Juneteenth, but there's yet to be really any movement on that. So they've begun staging this installation at the Ellipse. What are they hoping to get out of politicians?
What they're hoping is to get significant policy reform and change. And reparations have taken on so many meetings for so many different things. But at this core of the heart of the reparations movement is just that there hasn't been an atonement for what has happened to slavery. There hasn't been atonement that what has happened to Black Americans. And our country and our government hasn't acknowledged the full effect as a whole. We see it in certain movies. We see it right here on ABC News, where we talk about the impacts of what's happened to slavery and how it impacts Black Americans to this day, but we never have seen it as a collective presentation of the effects that happen, all the way from slavery, all the way to unemployment, all the way to Black war veterans not being able to participate in the GI Bill and for mortgages. It's because it's hard for people want to always see the good in America. People always want to see this good and this experiment that is democracy, not to criticize it and not to acknowledge the bad and not to acknowledge that we're still forming a perfect union to this day. And I think that is why they don't want to believe that it's as bad, because they don't see the policies. When you don't see the signs, when you see tangible acts of racism when it comes to signs for colors and for whites, then you see it's there. But we don't see it in the form of housing discrimination. We don't see it in loans. We don't see it in felonies that are still on records. We don't see it when they're keeping Black men out of homes so that order for Section 8 and for housing to come apart. We don't see it in job discriminations. It's invisible, right? And so when it's invisible, invisible, then it's othering and it's not fair and it can't be real, right? Just move on. All is well. And so that's why the activists are keeping the issue top and front and center and keeping it moving. Well,
and some companies have embraced Juneteenth as a holiday, as you mentioned, some companies. What more needs to be done? What would you like to see? What's the wish list?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see that companies are getting involved with it. And I think it's important as companies begin to think about this, it's important that, they have now chief diversity officers. But for me, your company doesn't really believe in diversity and inclusion unless the chief diversity officer is reporting to the CEO. If your chief diversity officer is still reporting to the human resources group, then it's not real, right? When it's reporting to the CEO, that means the CEO is putting diversity and inclusion in the annual reports to the shareholders. When it's reporting to the CEO is making sure that that department or that figure, that officer is fully funded in the role and position in order to make sizable change and not just donating $10,000 to a gala for charity, right?
Not surface change,
not
meaningful
surface,
change.
But that only happens when it reports to the CEO, and that means that it's real. And so for me, it starts there. Everything else is performative.
All right. Mike Muse, thank you so much. Great conversation and always good to see you.
Good to see you, Phil.
All right. And tonight, you can catch our special Sound of Freedom, a Juneteenth celebration in honor of Juneteenth and Black Music Month at 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC News and streaming, of course, on Hulu this weekend.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.